Okay, we'll go ahead and get this kicked off. So my name's Matt Hayden, and it's a great opportunity. Thank you, Bryson, and all the partners for getting us this time today. You get to follow the conversation around civil defense and scarcity. The first thing you want to do is you want to start talking about the food sector and agriculture and how that is going to come in big demand in any area of crisis and especially needs attention. So what I'll do is I'll allow our panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start with you, James. Oh, we may have a dead mic up here.
Let's try this one.
That looks good.
All right.
Thanks. James Johnson. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at John Deere. Prior to that, I was a Chief Information Security Officer at Honeywell, and I started out as a pen tester in the cybersecurity world. So I've been doing this for almost 25 years.
Scott?
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Algier. I'm here today as the Executive Director of the Food and Agriculture Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the Food and Ag ISAC, which was established by the industry in May of 2023.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jiwon Ma. I am a Senior Policy Analyst at Foundation for Defense of Democracy, and we are part of the Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation. And I primarily work on the CSE 2.0 work, which is just a continuation of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. And I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So first and foremost, the entire ag sector is getting more and more high tech. You're seeing a lot more introduction of advanced technology, of automation. Scott, let me start with you just from your ISAC hat. Where are we seeing a lot of those risks as a sector? And how are you seeing as a two-parter, like where does AI play into that risk calculus?
Yeah, thank you. I think the food and agriculture sector faces some of the same risks as other critical infrastructure, and we have some of the same challenges. Larger companies with more resources can manage risks better than smaller companies, and family farms with fewer resources. Right, Matt is exactly right. The technology integrated in modern agriculture today is just amazing. It's created so many efficiencies. We're able to feed more and more people with fewer and fewer farmers and fewer and fewer acres. So it's been a technological revolution in many respects in modern agriculture. But this does introduce risks. It introduces vulnerabilities. Operational technologies is a key area of concern for many of us in processing plants and just embedded throughout the infrastructure. Family farms are using IoT devices to monitor which cows have been milked, how far the calves have walked, where precision agriculture allows you to put weed killer within millimeters of your crop, but without actually touching the crop. So this technology is really awesome, and it's we need it, right? But it's also does indeed create some risks that we all need to be concerned about.
And Jason, James, looking at you, the John Deere aspect of things, you've got advanced technology globally. So it's not just at the Homeland perspective. How are you tackling some of these risks, and where does the AI calculus play in for you as well?
Mentioned AI. Well done. So I think from securing our products, we really focus a lot on making sure our customers have things that work, that are up and running when they're supposed to be running. That's really important to us. And that starts with really making sure that the equipment itself is resilient, and you can turn off some computers and the thing will still drive. So that's the beauty of some of the things we still have in place, just like your Tesla. You can still drive it if it's not in self-driving mode, things like that. But the efficiency that it brings to our customers, they're becoming very dependent on that. We used to sell planters with these big discs that would fold down, so that when you're actually planting your field, you could see where you planted and where you hadn't. Those can be special ordered now. They don't necessarily come on the equipment because they're so dependent upon the computer components of it. How we focus on this really is things like penetration testing of our equipment, continuous attack surface testing of our equipment, training our engineering teams as well. We use a lot of teachable points of view, helping them understand that when you develop code, develop it securely. And when you teach engineers how to think securely, they're way better at deploying security than we are in a lot of cases. So that's a key part of it. We also have a bug bounty program we've leveraged to help really enable folks to report things to us in a good way, so we can actually reward them for letting us know about it. We can get it fixed.
So, G1, when we talk about the risks to the sector, there's not a lot of regulatory insight. There's not a lot of general government frameworks around the agriculture sector, but there are with, say, energy, finance, a couple others. Can you kind of speak to the risks that kind of cross over and lessons we could learn from those other sectors?
Sure. So I think the energy and finance are definitely more well developed in terms of cybersecurity, the size, and I think the two major lessons learned from these two sectors is that voluntary cybersecurity standards don't work, and collective action can be very powerful. So I know you're laughing, but in the energy sector, I know if we think back to 2003, there's the Ohio transmission lines went down, and it ended up impacting Ohio and New York's nuclear reactors, and it impacted 50 million Americans. And after that happened, Congress took action. And in 2005, they made NERCSIP a mandatory standard where they have to follow certain security standards. And if you think about that, we're basically, so food and ag is basically operating where energy was 20 years ago. And that's pretty scary. And then for finance, we have banks sharing threat intelligence information with each other, and they are well protected so that they operate and don't have to deal with any sort of comparative disadvantage. And I think farmers also need that sort of protection, because it's going to be very difficult to convince farmers to share information if their, their like crop prices will be affected or their land value will be affected. So it's silly for us to think that the food and ag sector can self-regulate when the others, well-established ones, couldn't.
And James, pivoting back to you. So when we look at John Deere, somebody that's really innovating and really taking on a lot of the technology challenges that are out there, you're also working in a community that candidly isn't as tech savvy as one assumes in a lot of areas, but yet is very open to amending their operations to include innovation, to include automation, because they see the promise of a lot of these technology standards. Well, how do you see the edge where you have that innovation and risk kind of calculus? And when you talk about that, can you talk about where you kind of bring in your engineers and your world to that cyber challenge? Like, at what phase does that happen?
Yeah, so I think in general, our customers, we have some that are adopting really fast. We have some that they're going to wait and see what their neighbor does, right? How did that farm do this year with that technology? Is it better? They might invest in it then. From a standpoint of when we bring our engineers into this space and really thinking through just that, it's early on, right? We have a security by design process. We do static code testing, dynamic code testing. We look for secrets. We try to do all the things we can to make sure that every line of code is tested and that we have the right security. And to me, it's quality built into our products so that when they turn the key, this stuff does what it's supposed to do. But from a standpoint of thinking about just the interconnectivity to the cloud, it's really a big ecosystem. And that creates some of the challenges too. To answer your question.
Yes, absolutely. And then Scott, when we start talking about that community, information sharing is essential when it comes to cyber. One of the things we think of when it comes to new technology and sharing, how are you seeing from your ISAC perspective or just from your experience that there is this cyber threat sharing taking off, or is there more developmental work that needs to be done to really get it on par with some of the other ISAC activities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the Food and Ag ISAC, we are 2 years old. We're the country's newest ISAC, but we're not new, right? The IT ISAC, the Information Technology ISAC, had been incubating a community of food and agriculture companies through what they call the Special Interest Group since 2008, 2009. And so when the industry formed the ISAC, they wanted to continue to leverage the capabilities and the mature analysis that they were receiving from the Information Technology ISAC. So the Food and Ag ISAC was formed in partnership with the IT ISAC, and it still continues to receive some of it's the threat intelligence from the team of IT ISAC analysts that's been supporting that community for a while. So the analyst understands the industry, our member companies trust the analysts. So there's a great, there's a 15 years of worth of trust has been built up within the community that has enabled some pretty robust and threat intelligence sharing, and not just threat intelligence sharing, but they talk about what's integrating new technologies into their environment, into their corporate environments. They talk about supply chain risk management, how to push out some security practices to their smaller suppliers. So there's a range of activities that's ongoing. Of course, it's never where we want it to be, but it's effective. And the goal, and so you have these larger enterprises, you have these farmer cooperatives, you have some small, medium-sized enterprises who are members, but we recognize that not every company is going to be joining us. So we've formed partnerships with some trade associations, with some university partners, where we're sharing weekly threat intelligence with them for distribution to their members. And we've also developed a cyber threat report, some of which are available online, ransomware analysis that we make available. And also, we just came out a couple of weeks ago with a cybersecurity guide for small and medium-sized enterprises. So we're not expecting those small family farms to report cyber incidents to us, but what we're trying to do is push out tactics, low and no cost steps that they can take to protect themselves. And the report isn't just a list of 10 things that we think are important. It's based on the threat actors, the tactics and techniques and procedures that we're seeing of the threat actors in the environment.
So, Jiwon, when we start looking at a lot of the participants in this community being small to medium, when you start thinking about the family farm approach, as well as some of the rising enterprises that are coming out of there, they're going to run into the same problem the rest of the sectors have. There's not a lot of cyber talent to go around. And as they make their way to the higher paying jobs, getting a person in that early part of their career is usually where they land, or there's just not enough to go around. Where do you think that the federal or state or even community kind of leaders and resources could be brought to bear to assist in some of these hard challenges with that small to medium in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would always point to the ISACs, but since Scott's here, I'll let him speak to that later. But I think there are a lot of existing federal programs right now, and even state programs that I think we could really leverage in the sector. So I know that the USDA has the cooperative extension program that Scott mentioned earlier. They have these advisors go out to local farmers and educate them on agricultural practices that are helpful for them to raise productivity and just help their practices. And I have read that CISA's, there's a report. It was an after action report on CISA Cyberstorm. That's what it is. And the participants mentioned that CISA's regional offices were very helpful because they are basically like the federal link between locals and the government. And a lot of them were from the food and ag sector. So that is a already existing program that you can leverage. And then I think the US Cyber Trust Mark program from the FCC is a pretty good model if we're thinking about IoT devices. And so sort of like how they're asking vendors to embed security into their programs, we could ask vendors to do the same for farm equipment. And I genuinely think this is, a public goods problem where a cyber attack can impact more than one individual operator. So it's really up to the government at this point, since it's a market failure for government to intervene and support our local farmers.
Matt, if I may, I think there's a unique challenge in the food and agriculture sector, which is not everybody trusts CISA, right? They don't really trust the Department of Homeland Security, but they do trust the Department of Agriculture. But the Department of Agriculture isn't necessarily equipped to have the cyber resources that are available to make available to the cyber expertise. So we're trying to supplement some of that capability for the Department of Agriculture, providing them with some of our analysis and threat reporting for them to share and make available to the member companies. So, when I travel for the ITISAC, I'm also the executive director of the ITISAC. You go to San Francisco and you go to San Jose, you go to Austin, everyone says great things about CISA, right? But then you go to Des Moines, right? You go to Las Cruces, right? You go to, to Davenport, right? And people talk, who says that, right? So engaging with the Department of Agriculture and the ag extensions is really critical in elevating the security of this community.
So just pushing back to that, is there a policy change or an objective you would like to see in place that addresses some of that who's on first challenge, where their sector risk management agency is equipped to better serve that community?
Yeah, well, I think maybe we'll get to this later, but one of the points I wanted to bring up is I think one of the gaps that we have is there's no one other than the Food and Ag ISAC, it seems, developing cyber threat intelligence for the food and agriculture industry. There's no one in CISA responsible for generating threat intelligence and sharing that out with the community. I'm aware that there's threat intelligence going on this topic within DHS and maybe the larger federal enterprise, but it's not making its way out to the industry. So we've been asking for a long time, and Justin's great. Justin, we enjoy working with Justin, but there's within the department, there is no one within the federal enterprise who's responsible for providing cyber threat intelligence for industry to make informed risk management decisions.
James, in a world where you don't have a threat feed that's critical for ag to have specific to that sector, how are you addressing some of these risks, especially when you take into consideration that you're not just an agriculture partner, you're manufacturing, you have a lot of other sector-related challenges that come in the form of risk in both cyber and AI and security. Do you have a way of managing your supply chain, and that includes like the open source SBOM challenges?
Yeah. So just to be clear, we also have a captive finance business, so we are part of FSI,
There you go.
Financial Services. So we do have threat feeds there. We built really strong partnerships with CISA, the FBI, law enforcement to get threat feeds from them. We have great suppliers that we work with. I won't name names, but like they get threat feeds too. And they're working with some of the top companies in the world, and they have intel that we get to leverage based on that as well. So from that perspective, I think we have probably more threat feeds than we have people to go address some of the threats that, mitigate those threats in some cases. What was your second part of your question? I'm sorry.
So how do you work those into your manufacturing and everything? Like when we think of manufacturing, we think of kind of the physical supply chain, but you also have the software supply chain. And how are you guys maturing in your elevation of those risks into your products?
And the software supply chain is super interesting. And obviously there's a lot of politics happening around the SBOM right now and some of the legislation that's out there in this space. But from my perspective, we're really trying to make sure we keep our factories running. We've done a lot to segment and mitigate the risk. So the welding line maybe can't talk to the paint line. So if we do have an issue, it's not going to have a large blast radius. So we've used a lot of network segmentation to do that. But I would tell you, the integration we're starting to see with AI being deployed into just tools that we're already using today, like you can't stop it. Like general browsing, like you go to Google, I think you can put 1 million characters into a query on Google now, and it's a lot of data that could be dumped into an AI tool that would give you a response. So there are definitely challenges that we have in that space. But again, trying to build layers of defense into our factories is what we've done to really protect them. I'm less concerned about the SBOM. From my perspective right now, I think we're doing a pretty good job of mapping this stuff out in our products.
So another comment about the threats. I mean, there's been a really good point raised here by James, which is there is a lot of threat intelligence out there. Right. The challenge, I've been doing this for 20 years. When we used to have pizza parties when someone shared something with us, right? I mean, it was great. But now there's so much threat intelligence being shared through so many communities. Part of the challenge is understanding what's important to me and my community, what's important to my business. So part of what we do in the Food and Ag ISAC in partnership with with the IT ISAC analysts is we're monitoring some 230, 240 threat actors. And we've identified which 50 are most important to the food and are most active within the food and agriculture industry. So now we're able to focus some of our threat intelligence reporting and some of our analysis around those 50. We have playbooks on those 50. So now instead of asking the members to update, or pay attention to 240 different playbooks, we're asking them to pay attention to 50 different playbooks because these are the actors that we're seeing that are most frequently in the sector. And we provide regular reports to the members about which actors we're seeing increasing, which actors are decreasing, what their TTPs are. So if you get just a regular threat feed, you're getting a lot of indicators, which is good, but you also kind of need some understanding as to which of these are most relevant for me, which is a lot of time is what my team spends a lot of time trying to identify.
Jiwon, so when we look at this from the lens of multi-sector, a lot of other sectors have had sort of a baseline of cyber standards kind of imposed on them through their sector leadership or regulatory bodies. With the diversity of operations we're seeing across the agriculture sector, is that something that could be in play here? And if so, what do you think that would look like?
So yes, I definitely think there is a case for enforceable standards, but I also acknowledge that this has to be done very thoughtfully. Scott pointed out something very important earlier about how it's important to build that trust. And I know that certain states, like state of Nebraska, has a great program where they work with local farmers after an incident hits. And farmers are encouraged to report this, but again, it is not enforced. It is a voluntary thing, but farmers did talk about how it is very helpful to have one liaison from the state that works with them and the FBI. So if you're thinking about it, we can't apply all enforcement, or I guess all compliance to different critical infrastructure owners and operators of various sizes. And I think USDA already sort of has an example, or EPA as well, where you're enforcing environmental regulatory standards, and they start with large operators and apply the compliance and see if that framework works, and then sort of expand that to smaller communities. And we have also seen this in the water sector, where I think like market-based incentives is very helpful. So asking small water utilities to meet certain standards, and they are provided with free resources and tools to do so. And of course, the larger operators are sort of held accountable in a different manner with more advanced compliance measures. So I do think that is possible, but there have been a lot of lessons learned for TSA with like pipelines, rail, and aviation. And I think the industry has spoken up plenty of times that they want to be involved in this process so that the enforcement standards work for their needs and their operations.
James, as a manufacturer, as a person that supports this sector, you're also a large customer of several other critical infrastructure sectors. When you talk to your dependencies or interdependencies across those sectors, do you have these resiliency and security conversations with, say, power, water, all the other different kind of inputs that make you successful or resilient?
I've been asking my team that today, actually making sure we've done third-party risk reviews and things like that. But correlating that back to some of our bigger factories, I think will be an interesting exercise when I get back from this conference. It's just been really eye-opening to learn more about this sector. But we do a lot of tabletop exercises, and those have been super useful. Those go all the way up to our CEO staff and the board of directors. And we don't make these easy. We really try to put pressure, like it'll be, hey, we're going to be reporting earnings the week after this happens, or it's in the middle of harvest season. So it's super important that we get our equipment back online. So those have been really good exercises. Also thinking about the communications channels. So how do we make sure that we cover our customers, our dealers, and our shareholders, as well as our employees that are involved in an incident like this?
And how far do the just scale of those tabletops go? Do you start with like the locals of your community, or does it go, do you invite someone from state government, that kind of thing?
We have not in the last couple of years. It's something we talk about. We have great partnerships. Again, we work really hard so that when we call a supplier we spend money with, I want to make sure they answer the phone. So we'll do quarterly business reviews with those suppliers, and I try to attend at least one of those a year where I'm actually in person with them so that we have this relationship, so that if we have an event and I call, they pick up the phone. So
this wasn't on our question sheet. Have the feds been helpful at all with those?
We're always here to help, right? So no, I do think I really have seen improvement, and I've had a chance to interact with Jen Easterly in the past. I met I think it's still pending, the new secretary, or the new person that will be responsible for CISA, Sean Blanky. And I'm really excited
he almost had a vote today, but they put it off. So.
I'm optimistic about where they're headed with this, and I think they have the right mindset. It's been good. I will tell you, they helped our dealers quite a bit too. So really, you mentioned like people will go to where they trust. The farmers will, the customers will. And I think we've worked hard with our dealers. We've given them a framework of things. We help them assess the risks that they have to their dealerships, and we try to make sure that they're secure. I think I even see customers going to the dealers to say, hey, how should I respond to this? So we've been working hard to do that as well.
G1, when we talk about sort of the R&D to get ahead, so that left to boom kind of conversation, traditionally, in addition to tabletops, we see sort of these investment arms of the federal government, IRAD, R&D type funding. But we haven't really seen that in the agriculture space. What are you seeing from an interest to go in that direction, as well as where you think there may be some policy levers that could interact here?
So I think just thinking about what James said, I know that John Deere invests a lot in GPS technologies, and they're doing research so that they can improve their systems. And I think that's a case for, public-private partnerships. And I think that from the federal government side, I don't know if policymakers really understand farming cycles, like crop cycles, and understanding how farmers work with their equipment. So instead of replacing their equipment, they just repair it because it's cheaper to do that. So I know that the aviation sector struggles with this, and it's with legacy systems. So we need to figure out a way where cybersecurity can work with existing equipment. And I understand that's very challenging because FAA is very much struggling with this. But I think that there needs to be cybersecurity research investment that specifically looks at agricultural studies and crop cycles and the impact of climate change and all of these things that I don't know if policymakers are really thinking about it. And I think this is where industry key players come in to support that sort of research.
And Scott, we've been talking kind of the OT and cyber landscape of threats, but when you look at agriculture as a sector, or specifically several elements of that sector, they have targets of espionage, IP theft, not just criminal actors, but nation state actors. They have all sorts of biotech concerns. When you're talking to them about cyber threats, are they getting that information? They may be economic and geopolitical leaders all on their own outside of just a potential cyber disruption. Are they playing that kind of game out in their mind of an all hazards aspect also includes a lot of bad actors pointing at them?
Yes. So I think that the short answer to that is yes. And you're correct. I mean, there's a lot of intellectual property within the sector that nation states will want to, so that they can feed their population, right? And why go out and do the research and development when you can steal it, right? We've seen countries make leaps in military, and there's a famous case where these the Chinese government had people picking up seeds off of farms, bringing it back, so they can reverse engineer some of the seed and seed technology. So yes, they're very well aware of that, and it's a lot of food and agriculture companies are operating in countries that are not necessarily friendly to us. So they have those supply chain and both the supply chain, right, getting food and being reliant on suppliers in third party in countries that aren't friendly to us. But also their operations themselves, they have the same technology issues of trying to secure their enterprise in countries that are not friendly to us. So I think there's that great awareness about it. But Jiwan made a great point about the R&D, and which you raised as well. There's some awesome work going on in these universities, but I don't think we're necessarily making best use of it, right? Because it's not really well known across the industry what universities are doing, much R&D that's relevant to them. So we're partnering with universities, and we have a handful of them now for initial partners, where we're trying to be a resource so that they can align R&D priorities to the member company needs. And if they're not going to do that, which is fine, but at least if you're doing research and development in this area, let us know so we can identify companies in our membership who have that interest, because they may not be in, say Iowa State University might be doing some great research, but the company may not be in Iowa, right? They may not be aware of it. Companies outside of Iowa. So let's try and introduce that R&D into some of these other companies so they can better leverage it.
So James, as much research as we pour into this, you made a great point earlier about it still has to just work. So how do you get into that resilience mindset when we think of large agriculture platforms being very resilient on things like GPS, on very discrete sets of precision? How far down that stack do you go, and how do you work in that level of, like, do you get to, when you're red teaming them, like, oh, I red carded GPS, you can't count on that anymore, now work? How do you do those kinds of operations testing against your platforms, and how are you seeing them perform in that degraded or disrupted environments?
Yeah, so we do have a red team that's pen testing of our products. I would tell you we have a long list of things we want to pen test, and probably a longer list than we actually have resources for. I really want to point out talent is a huge part of it. So put a plug in for next week. We have I think it's the 4th annual Cyber Tractor Hacking Challenge, which will be actually at Iowa State University, which is where I went to college, actually. They have a really awesome cybersecurity program. They have a great ag program as well. But when we first started this Cyber Tractor Challenge, it was all about teaching students how does a tractor work? What is the equipment that's in there? What's the electronics on it? What code does it use? How does it respond? And then they get 2 days to try to break it. And the last day they get half a day to kind of go present their findings, show us what you did. And they'll do things like try to make the lights flash, or one person set some of the lights flashing to dance, to like dance music. So students are super creative, but these students leave that and they're like, I had no idea there was something this cool to do in this space around heavy equipment and really learning in the cybersecurity space. So having the right talent is really what I think helps us a lot from a standpoint of doing the right testing and making sure our products are secure.
Okay, all right. Juwan, the world of critical minerals has done a great job in the marketing that they are essential. Like when we go to any news story, it's always, we've got to get critical minerals because we have to have them for our smartphones and everything else under the sun. But what we don't hear is some of the key components that are national supply chains for our food and agriculture sector. In the global supply chain world, is there a national security wrinkle we need to be looking at the same way that the microphone relay or bullhorn there is for critical minerals?
Yes, I definitely think so. Like food security is national security, and I think people often forget that. Economists have said that food prices, when it fluctuates, it is a great predictor for social unrest, and especially in countries with weaker democratic institutions. But the US is not immune to this. If a foreign adversary were to attack our food systems, it can significantly impact our commodity markets, and the prices fluctuate, and that impacts our allies and partners and all countries participating in global trade. And China, for example, has already a great massive grain stockpile in case they run into some sort of problem where they can't feed their people. But they have such a large stockpile that it can actually feed the entire country for about 6 to 12 months. And the US does not have anything close to that. Even our grocery stores, I think they stock about 3 to 5 days worth of food supplies. And I know that our stockpile doesn't last us 6 to 12 months. So that is a pretty serious issue. And also just going back to the technologies that we were talking about, farmers were saying how they prefer to use drones that are Chinese made because it's so much cheaper. And so we're seeing this issue where the technologies used in our critical infrastructure come from countries where we have issues with, like China. And we saw that in our ports, 80% of the ship to shore cranes are made from China. And the Coast Guard is currently going through all the ports, looking at their crane systems to see if there are any vulnerabilities. So if, any sort of the trade aspect goes down, that's an economic warfare, basically. And then to secure our critical infrastructure at home, we do have to think more critically about how we can manufacture that either in countries that are partners and allies or at home. So I think that's a pretty big concern.
Well, we have one more question from me, then we're going to do some roundup comments, then we're going to hit some questions from the group. So James, I'll start with you. We are really good as a community in the cyber community in responding after an incident. So, SolarWinds happens, oh my gosh, we can't let that happen again. In a world where we want to actually prepare and mitigate instead of be largely in a reactive posture, do you have one or two priorities that you would love to see stakeholders in your world embrace and empower so that the next 12 to 24 months we may prepare against that next bad thing?
I think a couple things. One, I think with the more remote our workforce is, especially our knowledge workers, we have opportunities to make sure that we're onboarding people who are who they say they are. That's, I think, a challenge we're going to have as we have more remote workforce. From a standpoint of building security into what we're doing, I'm really blessed because, again, John Deere, what regulations or not, we're going to try to do the right thing for our customers. We've spent 185 years building a brand, and we know what that trust means to our customers. We do not want to damage that trust. And so they are heavily invested, and I meet with the board quarterly. There's a lot of conversations we have, but they care a lot about this, and they understand the damage that it could cause. So I think having people in our supply chain, our key suppliers, even the smaller mom and pop shops, finding somebody to help them ramp up and really, I heard a CISO once say, we need a cash for clunkers program for some of these, like, how do we incentivize some of these smaller mom and pop shops to really get invested in this space? And so I think that's an opportunity we have too, is because without the supply chain, we don't really make products, right? We all understand that too.
So Scott, do you have your top two?
Sure. So I think from where we sit, helping companies make informed risk management decisions is really important. Everybody is constrained in resources, right? There's not enough talent, there's not enough technology, right? There's not enough money. The margins are pretty small in the industry as a whole. Within different elements have different margins, but as a whole, it's a pretty low margin industry. So helping allocating these limited resources is essential, and helping companies make informed risk management decisions is essential. I think the second part of that is to facilitate some of this informed risk management obviously requires the sharing of threat intelligence across companies so we can understand the threats, understand interdependencies, help protect the supply chain. I'm not here to advocate for any specific piece of legislation. I'm just noting that a very important piece of legislation called CISA 2015 expires in the end of September. And renewal of that would go a long way into preserving an environment where companies feel as though they enabled and incentivized to continue this collaboration.
G1?
I will always say that sector risk management agencies need to be funded and they need better resources with personnel. So if we're making the parallel between the energy sector and the food and ag, last fiscal year, energy sector got $200 million for their sector risk management agency duties, whereas the food and ag sector got maybe $500,000. And you can't protect our farms or any sort of the part of the supply chain when they don't have the people or the money to do so. So that's the first one where I think the government really needs to work on. And the second one is to support our local farmers. Like Scott said earlier, farmers don't trust, just sharing information with the FBI and CISA. So we need to figure out a way where we can build that trust. And James also made a really great point about how the students were doing really creative work. And I think that we have to sort of bring in young talent to work with these local farmers to figure out a way where they can sort of like salvage parts and create new products. And I think that there could be a lot more innovation in that regard.
All right. Hopefully we'll have a question up. Oh, I've got a lot of hands. All right. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm going to play my imprimatur here. So first of all, Scott, you mentioned earlier that a lot of folks down in the trenches don't see CISA, and that's easy. That's Dr. Alan Freeman's fault. So James, I'm going to put you on the spot, and this is going to be an uncomfortable question because that's part of what we try to do here is like throw people under the bus. You're not being thrown under the bus. I'm going to give you the opportunity to throw some folks under the bus, starting with the federal agencies. So real question, right? We all talk about sharing. We all talk about government's role. Government's role is shifting, right? Jiwan, you talk about the SRMA funding. Well, that's clearly shifting under this administration. So what, James, would you actually want as a private company CISO for the government to do or to not do? Like, what do you actually want from them?
Again, I'm blessed to have really good support from leadership, and so we get funding and resources that we need. I think, first of all, withholding or gatekeeping information from companies in this industry that we're in here in cyber, it only helps the adversary, right? So the more we can share intelligence across 8 groups and find some way to do that in a trusted way. I've been trying since 2003 to figure this out. We have, as I was at Honeywell, we had the same issue. How do we share intel, trust who we're sharing it with? You know, is it classified or not classified? Bottom line is we got to find some way to do this where we trust each other, we can share the information. Regulatory wise, we're really not looking for any help. Again, I don't think so from our standpoint. Maybe on the smaller supply chain components of it from that perspective. But the faster they can share intel with us, the things I'd like to know about, like Full Typhoon, for instance, I wish I knew more about that. And again, I probably will a year from now. It used to be that agencies might wait a year. They'd watch a threat actor for a long time and they'd call you and say, hey, by the way, we saw some traffic on your network. When did you see it? 12 months ago. I mean, do I even have logs still to see what was going on with that? So I think they're getting better, though. I will say this. We are getting threat intel faster. This doesn't always have the context that we need to respond to it. So I appreciate the question, but we do have pretty good relationships.
Sure. You have a mic, Bren? Okay, sorry.
All right, great discussion. I'm going to follow up on something that Bryson asked. Understanding that you don't necessarily need more federal regulation, but there also is an understanding that we have national standards for food safety. Food safety. What document would you want to touch? And this is for the entire group, where we can add a cyber section to the safety aspect. Cybersecurity is good for protecting the equipment, the data, the systems that feed into the agricultural and food sector. But really what we're talking about is human food safety, very clear standards. What document should we add a cyber safety protection standard to? And then why not work on that together? And who would be the organization to bring a group together of cyber experts to write that section?
So speaking for me, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on the food safety regulations, but I will say is that I spent a lot of time previously, in the last couple of years, we've had some really good success. It's been really difficult to bridge some of the conversations about cybersecurity with food safety professionals and food safety experts.
Cyber safety group, you can have that discussion.
Oh, it's been difficult. So I'm looking for the right form as well. If I knew it, I would recommend one, but I'm still searching for the answer myself.
So I know that for the water sector, CISA's JCDC was working on basically putting together an incident response document. So a lot of the industry members were involved, the small water utilities were involved, other federal agencies were involved. And I remember attending weekly meetings and everyone came prepared and they were contributing something. We got a homework and we have to think about things and come prepared to discuss it. And I think that's a great place to start. I think the industry really needs to collaborate. I couldn't tell you exactly where that document should be placed, but I think that CISA and USDA has, a really great opportunity to collaborate. So that's where I would begin.
Yeah, the problem is incident response, people are dying. Yeah, you don't want to, that's not where you start actually figuring out how to. So I appreciate bringing that team together, but I really don't want to talk about this response. I actually want to talk about how do I prevent incident from a safety perspective. They're very, I'm very familiar with the farming industry, used to be involved with the farmer. There are very specific guidelines on handling produce and ultimately pesticides at levels that are safe. You just need to ensure that there's a section in there the farmer understands, okay, here's what you need to cyber safe.
All right, we'll kick it over to Alan.
So love this panel, fascinating. I want to sort of call back to the earlier name of this conference, Hack the Capital. Seems to me that ag in particular is a confluence of two very important forces that are working against each other, which is you've got our right to repair, and then you've got the need for cryptographically designed, trusted software. This seems to be coming to a head in a very bad way with the potential for very bad policy in both directions. Is there anything we can do to continue to foster good security research and the can-do spirit of American farmers, original hackers, while still making sure that we can trust our equipment?
Yeah, so guessing you're directing that question at me primarily, but what I would tell you is our customers fix their equipment every day. We give them a lot of access. They can fix whatever they want to fix in their equipment. We're trying to do more and more of that. But you point out a really important thing. How do we make sure that we have the safety, the emissions, the things that we want to make sure that don't get modified in our equipment signed digitally? So we have secure codes, secure config, secure boot, so that things can be modified where they're unsafe for humans or the environment as well. So again, I think it's just balance the stress strike, right, between usability, functionality, and security. And I think we're trying to strike that. But again, turn the key, you want it to work. You also want to buy a tractor that you know has 100 hours on it running at 180 horsepower, not 100 hours running at 300 horsepower, right? That's part of the equation here as well. But we're focused on security, not that from my space.
All right.
So it's kind of a two-parter. One is, from John Deere selling to the end users or dealerships, are you guys seeing requests for cybersecurity standards from dealers or small businesses in this space? And then from like the ISAC side, are you seeing other machine builders advertising or using cybersecurity as a marketing tool? Because most of the times when I was growing up, it's red or green, and it's because of an efficiency gain, or we can do more crop haul, and it's never been around cybersecurity. So just curious to see.
Thanks for bringing this up again, because I meant to mention this. The Cyber Tractor Challenge happening next week in Ames. We went from it being a John Deere only event to actually being an industry event. So we actually have our competitors coming to this because our job is to make sure our customers who don't always run a fully green fleet, right, or implements that are green behind it, to make sure that they're operating, that they're secure from that standpoint. So we've done that. I will say that a few of our dealers that are more advanced have asked us for like, hey, a SOC 1 or a SOC 2 report, or can you guys attest that the services you're offering to us or delivering do meet their expectations? But that is not happening as fast as it might happen in other industries. But we do have a few dealers that are more advanced asking for that.
And I think my comments will align well with those, which is, I think there are certain, the demand in the marketplace seems to be more convenience and how the quality of the product and how quickly it can how efficient it is. Some companies, the larger enterprises, larger farms, there's security conversations come up every now and then. But the average consumer, in my view, they're wondering, hey, why would the Chinese want information about my farm? Right? Hey, well, why is cybersecurity? I'm out here in the rural Minnesota or wherever. Why would somebody want my information? A lot of unfortunately, that's the common mindset where they're not the farmers themselves, the people who are buying some of these products aren't all that. And it's not, cybersecurity is not high on their priority list when they're evaluating products.
I have a question, maybe a comment and a question. CISA has these national critical function sets that any function set that is part of that catalog, almost no one owns it, even though CISA is trying to own those functions and food agriculture, medical, any part of critical infrastructures. 5 years ago, I wrote 20 pages to USDA about threat intelligence for food and agriculture sector. They told me they don't care about it. 10 years ago, I was in FDA, talked about cybersecurity for medical devices. They told me they don't care about it unless it becomes a safety issue. So there are two problems. Who owns these problems in these sectors? Second, what is that key issues that makes one of these agencies care? For FDA medical devices, at the end of the day, it became safety. Is it food safety? Is it food traceability? What is that key issue in your sector that eventually would make one agency to step up?
So I would from where I sit, I think the Department of Agriculture, I think they care. I think it's a large part of resource issue. And I think another point of emphasis is that for so long, the sector as a whole has been focused on food safety and contamination and biohazards and bioterrorism attacks against the food supply themselves. I'm getting people to recognize, hey, you know what, you have an unsecure and operational technology environment. Okay, thank you for that. Right, move on. There are other resources, other priorities within companies. I think I'm seeing a shift in that. Right, as I mentioned, the Food and Ag ISAC, we're only 2 years old. I've been working with food and ag companies, however, since 2008, and there's a shift, right? They're getting to understand it. The companies are trying to push these practices down to their supply chains. And I think from the USDA perspective, we have a strong relationship with them. We value what they're doing. I think it's not every sector risk management agency is resourced to have maximum impact in the cybersecurity.
Do you have any feedback?
I mean, I agree with Scott. I don't know when you sent the 20-page document, but they probably didn't have someone to read it. So I don't think it's that they don't care. I think they do. It's just that they're competing priorities where they can't address these issues. I don't know what it would get policymakers to care or an agency to care. I think that in the past, if we were looking at other sectors, we have to deal with consequences of several blackouts, several issues where people can't access certain resources. So I don't want that to happen, but potentially when it's already too late, that's maybe when they would care.
Yeah, to the point Juwan's making, that reactive is traditionally the government posture. If you want this traditional politic right now to take attention to it, you really have to show it as an empowerment as opposed to a safety or security feature. You can't align with the priorities of a lot of these fast-moving economic drivers and say, by the way, you can't do this unless it's cyber secure. They're going to want to hear, oh, you can use AI because it's cyber secure, because of these maturity and modernization efforts. And oh, by the way, we've done some great work on making sure that threat understanding evolves those standards with that empowerment. So we're seeing a lot of, when we talk to people on the Hill, when we talk to people inside the executive branch, their focus is not, how do I make my stakeholders more cyber secure? Their question is, our stakeholders are looking to the government and saying, how can I get all these fancy new things that I'm being told I have to do into my environment, into my operations in a way that you're not going to smack me for? Tell me that, and I'm going to be happier to hear about it. So you're probably going to see an empower argument versus a security argument moving forward as the carrot that gets more attention, at least from a resourcing as well as from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, I've been an advocate for a while of the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That was what we're taught back in the day with the CISSP certification, which they stated myself a lot. But I've always been an advocate of adding safety to that. I think it's with AI, machine learning, automation, all the things happening out there, whether it's on the road or in the field. I think that's a huge part of what happens going forward. Think about workplace safety, that's OSHA, right? So I don't know where this fits, but I do think that it's definitely on our mind. How do we make sure our products are safe?
Any other last questions? We have one in the way back. This will be our last question.
Sure, thanks. Sorry. Thanks all, appreciate the panel. My name is Justin, I'm with CISA and a Food and Ag Liaison. I did a couple things I wanted to add. We have a new product. It's only a couple of weeks new, but it's only available to the Sector Coordinating Council food ag folks. It's a cyber vulnerability snapshot with over 100 folks who provide their information on a voluntary basis through a vulnerability assessment. Brings up some of the highlights that are being seen in the sector. If I just sum up the whole report, it'll be a quarterly report that we'll be doing. It's probably software updates, which is common across many sectors. To the other question that came up earlier, how best to reach the sector? I would just add, I agree. I think some of the USDA folks are out in the field on the ground, closer to the folks and farmers out there are good resources. The associations, so the Farm Bureau, the National Farmers Union, the Commodity Ag Association, so corn growers, wheat growers, soybean, those are great mechanisms to reach their members by doing events or situations where you can speak directly with their members. Or if those associations are willing to share some of the information that we all have that can help the sector. Those are among, just among some of the resources we can use to reach out to the sector. That's all. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you all for the panel, and thank you guys for the time, and we'll turn it over to the next agenda item.